Hi. Adjust the camera. Hit our participants button. Okay. And this is when we do the vamp. Oh, we should check our audio, make sure we got the right mic selected. Sure do. Oh, I hear Biz. So it's almost time to start. Biz is screaming. I'm gonna close the door, which doesn't actually help because then he just screams outside the door. It makes me feel like I did something. Oh, I'm getting nasty text messages from Biz's mom. Oh no. Okay, it's 8:01. We don't have to awkwardly stand in silence anymore. This is also what I'm like in meetings in person if no one's talking in the room before we get started. So it's not just you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to January 2023. We made it. This is our webinar for Why Should I Visit? We are talking this month about going to Iceland, which is a country, not a city. The clever among you will realize that. And normally we talk about like cities because I like to talk about like the vibe of a smaller place because a country is a big place, but Iceland only has one city and like you can't avoid going there. So we'll talk about Reykjavik, but like we're talking about all of Iceland this time. Normal stuff. This is being recorded, but you're not being recorded. And I'll put it on YouTube like tomorrow if you want to watch a recording or share it with anyone. If you have questions as the little talk goes on, just hit the Q&A button, which is down in your menu bar somewhere at the bottom of your screen, and add questions as you go. I like to have questions so that I can be less awkward at the end as well. And we'll go ahead and kick things off. But before we kick things off, we have a disclaimer. And this is a multifaceted disclaimer. I am not a geologist, but I did marry a geologist. And normally said geologist sort of helps me review some of this stuff in advance, but Kat has been in the Darien Gap looking at a harpy eagle for the last few days. And so I did not run any of this past her. I was sort of banking on the fact that she was going to be on a plane during this webinar and wouldn't actually see it. But then it turned out she is, I believe, watching from the airport in Atlanta. So that's the secondary disclaimer. First disclaimer, I apologize if I get the geology wrong. Second disclaimer, Kat, I'm sorry if I get the geology wrong, especially for you. Third disclaimer, I think I've managed to construct the talk to avoid as many Icelandic name pronunciations as possible, but I apologize if I get the names of places grotesquely wrong. So those are my disclaimers. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Iceland. You know, we have to start with the map. It's the rule. Iceland is a large island in the North Atlantic. This is hopefully not totally surprising to you. What might be surprising actually though is to understand why it might seem like, you know, like 10 years ago, suddenly everyone you knew was talking about Iceland. And I'm always fascinated by how things sort of enter the cultural conversation in ways that like feel organic, and then you find out actually they weren't. And so the reason everyone you know suddenly started talking about Iceland's amazing, you should go to Iceland, is because during the sort of 2008, 2010-ish collapse of the world financial system, which you might remember, so the Eurozone crisis, which sort of came after our financial crisis, hit Iceland really, really hard because Iceland had a lot of stuff going on in terms of like fiscal vehicles, financial vehicles that all exploded. And the Icelandic economy was just totally like destroyed, like decimated in like ways that are pretty shocking for those of us who probably weren't paying that much attention at the time. And Iceland was sort of faced with this problem of we need to like build a new economy, but we are a small island in the middle of the North Atlantic. It's very cold for much of the year. The sun doesn't come out, et cetera. So like if you're Spain and you want to build a new economy, you might say like, oh, can we like lure some factories from France? Like we'll get the, get Peugeot to set up a factory in Spain instead, right? And build cars in Spain. Much harder to do if you're Iceland, because like Peugeot is probably not going to open a factory in Iceland. Wouldn't make a ton of sense. So instead, the Icelandic government said, okay, what if we get like hipster millennials to come here? And they launched a really, really concerted effort to bring tourists to Iceland and essentially promote Iceland as a tourism destination. And sort of everything from, getting the Anthony Bourdains of the world to come and check it out to like making sure there were affordable flights from many of the cities that hipster millennials live in. And so that is why suddenly everyone was interested in Iceland. Hello, Biz. So Iceland. Okay, I'm gonna just move him very quick. This is Biz. Okay, I'm back. All right, hi again. Okay, so Iceland. We're going to talk about a trip around Iceland. So we're going to start in Reykjavik because, as I said, that's essentially your only option, unless you're coming by boat. And even then, you're probably going to land in Reykjavik. It's where the airport is. If you are in Iceland on a shorter stop, and we'll talk about ways to do that, you're going to really be focused in this section of the country, which is sort of called the Golden Circle often. And we'll get to that in a minute. But we're specifically going to be focusing in this talk on touring Iceland in a camper van, and we're going to be following Route 1, which is also the only route. You notice it is this line of highway that goes all around the country. And so basically the trip that we did back in 2016 was following this entire circle, essentially, all around the country. And we're going to be talking about sort of the logistics of doing that more than like, you should stop at this site, but not this site. And we'll talk about some things there as well. So that was a lot of introduction this month. Here's our outline, because you got to have an outline for a talk. We're going to talk about why you're going to love Iceland. We're going to talk about what you'll do. We'll talk about some logistics. And then hopefully there'll be Q&A at the end when you put questions into the Q&A widget. So why are you going to love Iceland? First off, it's like shockingly beautiful. And it's shockingly beautiful sort of everywhere you look. It is not a place where you need to go seek out beauty. It is a place where you would struggle to avoid beauty. And it's the type of beauty that is both like, sort of picturesque, but also, awe-inspiring in the sense of this could kill me. Everything could kill me. That kind of awe. And so it's just an amazing country. It is sort of both in terms of the density of amazing stuff like this and the diversity of amazing stuff, I think pretty unique in the world. It is also a place where you can be sort of very off the grid and have a really amazing adventure. And so this is a picture of me. That's me, right? Yes, that's me that Kat took when we were on a hike one day. And you get the sense that you're not running into a lot of crowds, not a lot of tour groups following a flag around with little earpieces in. You can go have an adventure. And we'll talk about how to have a safe adventure as we get through the talk here. I would say also another thing you should really invest in Iceland is getting connected to some of the cultural history, because this is, a unique place in terms of the nature and the geology, but it's also unique in terms of culture because it takes an awful lot of work to survive, just full stop, to survive in this place. And there's a lot of opportunities as you tour the country to connect with that Icelandic history, both the Icelandic history going back to the sort of Norse Viking culture, as well as the sort of more modern Iceland as a country history, and to learn about sort of the types of people who've called this country home, the ways in which they've managed to survive in this really harsh climate, and some of the unique things about how they live. And actually, I think that was probably, for us, maybe the biggest surprise was how powerful that understanding was as we toured the country. So let's talk about a trip to Iceland. As I said, we're going to be focusing on doing a camper van tour of Iceland. So this is a little different. This is going to be a little more heavy on the logistics and how you make a trip like this work. And we'll talk about some of the things you're going to see along the way. But I really want to give you a sense of how achievable it is to go and do a trip like this, how affordable it can be, and that it shouldn't be a sort of scary thing for you. And so let's talk about some of your options if you are going to Iceland. First off, I sort of mentioned that there is a lot you can do in the immediate vicinity of Reykjavik. And one of the things you've probably noticed if you've gone looking for flights to Europe is that there are a lot of flights that stop over in Reykjavik on their way to Europe. And often they're very cheap flights. Again, not a coincidence. So one of the things that you can do is it's pretty easy on one of these affordable international flights to engineer a 1, 2, 3 day stopover in Reykjavik on your way to Amsterdam and then onward to elsewhere in Europe. And not only is that a great way to sort of slow your adjustment to jet lag, but it's a great way to sort of step a foot in Iceland while also continuing on to another type of European trip. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to engineer one of these stopovers, I would say don't try and get a car and go do a crash tour of the country. There's all these great, really affordable tours that you can do either as day trips out from Reykjavik or maybe an overnight where they're going to just pick you up at a hotel in the city and take you out, and you're going to see amazing geysers, you're going to see the Continental Divide, you're going to see jaw-dropping waterfalls. You can do all of that within a sort of 1-2 hour drive of Reykjavik and have this amazing experience. Like it's sort of a very happy coincidence that some of the most impressive things in the whole country are very accessible from the place you're going to land. So very, very doable on a stopover. And I definitely encourage anyone who's sort of looking at an itinerary where that works out, definitely do that. Alternatively, if you're going to do a longer trip and you want to do some more exploration, you have, I think, about 3 options. You'll notice there's nowhere on here that it says like use public transit. No, this is going to be for people who are at least comfortable driving their own vehicle. So first option is rent a car and then tour the country and stay in hotels. Absolutely, totally viable, totally doable. If camping's not for you, if you have sort of mobility challenges or other sort of needs where a hotel is just a much better fit for you, very doable. The caveat is you're going to be staying in pretty small hotels as you get out into the sort of more remote parts of the country. And they are often going to be pretty basic, and they often fill up quickly during the high season. So you're going to want to make sure, maybe even before you book your flight, sort of identify the time frame you want to be there, but then make sure that you can get hotels sort of in roughly the places in the country that you want to be before you sort of commit. Because if the only hotels in the area around a site that you're interested in have 8 rooms, and those 8 rooms are booked during the time you want to be there, that can be a real challenge. So alternatively, if you're comfortable, not being in a hotel, you have a couple options. One is you can rent a car and just, get a tent and go camping. So you can either bring all your own camping gear if you're someone who has all of that, or there's tons of options for renting that when you land in Reykjavik. And so if you like camping, or maybe you want to do some more actual like backpacking, totally doable. And there's campgrounds all around the country. We're going to talk about campgrounds as we get through this as well. So totally a good option. But I'm here to tell you that a camper van in Iceland is really cool, really easy, and I think a great balance of sort of adventure, but still a little bit comfortable. So when I say a camper van, and I may accidentally say RV here a few times because I'm American, but we're not like, this is not a bus that has like beds and showers and flat screen TVs in it. We are talking about a European style van. So much smaller than like an American minivan. Sort of think Ford Transit Connect if you're really into your small work vehicles. But that kind of vehicle. And it's going to be a vehicle that's been converted as a basic camper. This isn't the kind of thing that you would do like hashtag van life in, living in year round. It is specifically sort of 1 to 2, 2-week trips. You could probably do longer, but you would not make this your mobile house. But what you'll see, this is our van. What you'll see is it's a very, well organized space with everything you're going to need for a week or a couple of weeks in Iceland. Specifically, what you're going to find is you're going to have space to sleep 2, 3, 4 people, depending on the van you get. The small one like ours is really only 2 people, but you can get some that go up to 4. Maybe if you've got kids, you could sort of organize it to stretch that a little bit more, but you're not going to find any sort of American style vehicles like that easily available, the really big things. And I don't think you'd want to drive those either. They're generally going to have a solar panel on the roof that charges an onboard battery that's really just there to make sure that you've got some light at night, an overhead light, and to keep your little refrigerator running. So you're going to have a little fridge that can keep your vegetables and your yogurt and whatever else chilled while you're out hiking, and you don't have to worry about anything there. You're going to have plenty of power for that. You'll also be able to usually charge any devices when you're running the engine. And generally, they're going to come with some sort of converter so that you can just plug in a laptop. You'll have a gas heater, as in a heater that uses the gasoline or the petrol from your van tank to make sure that it doesn't get too cold at night. If you're there during a colder season, or you just want to be a little toasty. You'll have a water tank and a stove, so a little kitchen sink that you can use to do the washing up and to make a tea, that kind of thing, and a little sort of single burner stove, usually just with those replaceable gas tanks like you take camping. The thing that I think surprises people for a couple of reasons is that it can be really affordable. So I think people have this idea that Iceland is a really expensive destination. And certainly there would be ways to make a trip to Iceland really expensive, but it absolutely doesn't have to be. And we'll talk about how to make it cheap. But a van like the one that we have here, like ours from Happy Campers, I just looked when I was putting this talk together, and you can rent a van like this on the order of 70 euros a night. And when you consider that that's not only your transportation, your rental vehicle, but it's also your housing, and it's enabling you to eat much more affordably because you're able to cook your meals easily. 70 euros a night sounds like quite a bargain compared to staying in hotels, or certainly, staying in any, major European city or anything like that. The last thing I'd mention about the sort of the camper vans you're going to get in Iceland, is that they're super easy to drive. So it's just like driving any other car. You will generally be getting one with a manual transmission, although I'm sure that I know for a fact you can get automatics as well, a little more expensive. But beyond that, this is not like driving a bus. It's not something that you're going to be scared that you're going to be knocking people off the road. It's just like a car. So how do we put a trip together? Part of the reason I'm not going to focus so much on specific destinations is because I don't think you should focus too much on specific destinations. You need to plan a trip to Iceland with flexibility in mind. If you go with your hopes totally set on, I need to see this site, I need to see the icebergs floating out to sea, and I need to get this perfect photo for Instagram that I've always imagined getting, the weather and the sort of the landscape of Iceland will punish you for the hubris of trying to plan that precisely. And so I think it's much more to treat this as a trip where you're doing some exploration. You've got an idea of some things you'd like to see and the general route you want to go, but you're also giving yourself the flexibility to explore and to adjust your plans as you go. And when I say embrace the van, that's really what I mean. The flexibility of the van is you can adjust your changes because you don't have a booking at a specific hotel. If you want to stay an extra night somewhere, that's super easy. If you want to, stop for the day and do a hike and come back and make your dinner, that's not a problem. You should, though, be using campgrounds. This is something that I think there's been a lot of sort of, so Icelandic people will sometimes be grumpy about tourists, which, if you remember when I explained how all the tourists ended up in Iceland, it's like, well, you guys did kind of explicitly ask for this. So you take that with a grain of salt. But one thing that I think does really frustrate them is that Iceland, like a lot of the Nordic countries, has a sort of tradition that you're allowed to camp on any land. right? And the idea is if a storm comes in and you're trying to get back to your house and you can't do it, like you need to be able to just like camp on someone's lawn because otherwise you're going to die. And as more tourists started showing up, all kinds of travel blogs and things would say, isn't it amazing? You can just like pull over in your van anywhere, just like pull off on a road and camp. And that's awesome. But, you know, as tourists are wont to do, we sort of ruined it. We left trash everywhere and people were, you know, leaving human waste at the side of the road, and the Icelandic folks got grumpy about it. And so there's been some pushback around that. So I would say stay in campgrounds. We'll talk about campgrounds, but campgrounds are super affordable. They're everywhere. And what you're going to get for, you know, a few euros a night is you're going to get a safe place to park. You're going to get a shower. You're going to get a bathroom. Often you're going to get an indoor space so that if the weather's really crappy, you can go hang out indoors by a fire with other campers. And you become then connected to a hub where you can, you know, find out about other activities as well. So that is, I feel my responsibility as someone encouraging people to go to Iceland is to say, yes, legally, you may be able to camp anywhere you want. Please don't do that. Use campgrounds. I'd also encourage you to think about bringing your own food. That's a really easy way to make the trip affordable. And dress for every season, because you will experience every season, whether it's just, you know, as you're driving around, or certainly if you do any hikes that take you up to any elevation, you're going to go from, you know, very nice t-shirt weather, maybe not shorts weather, but definitely t-shirt weather, and you will move into easily, you know, 70-mile-an-hour winds and sideways snow. So you need to dress for every season, bring plenty of stuff. As I said, I recommend bringing some food. So we brought a lot of like, you know, dried ramen, packaged ramen, other things that would be easy to prepare in the van. And then we supplemented it by getting some vegetables and other fresh items, things that you can, you know, you can't bring into the country legally at the, you know, grocery stores in Reykjavik. You will have options as you travel the country to sort of resupply. But you know, Reykjavik's going to be your best bet for doing that. And you're going to want to, you know, stock up on anything you can that's going to last for your trip while you're in Reykjavik before you sort of set out on your big adventure. So we're going to head out. We're going to go on our trip. There is one thing you should just remember. Don't be stupid. The only reason people get hurt in Iceland is when they're stupid. The main reason, I would say. And so what that means is, you know, you're driving a van. It's not all-wheel drive. It's almost certainly not all-wheel drive. It's not got big elevation or ground clearance. It's not got beefy off-road tires. So, you know, don't try and ford a river. Yeah, that seems obvious, but then tourists go and do it because, like, the road, they're following a road and the road comes to a river and they're like, well, the road goes through the river, so I guess it's okay. It's like, well, no, but you're driving a Ford Fiesta. You can't go through the river. You use some common sense. So don't be stupid, but do have an adventure. And so I always recommend guidebooks. Absolute must-have in Iceland, both because you're probably not going to have cell service a lot of the time, but also because a paper guide is just fantastic for this. As I say, you're going to be setting off on a journey, you know, driving off, maybe doing a lap of this country, and a guidebook is your best way to find out about all the weird things that you can get to just off the road. Amazing sites, cultural stops, food stops, all kinds of stuff. So we want to have an adventure. And our adventure is going to have a few different categories of activities, specific adventure activities. I'll explain what that means. Geology, nature, hot springs, cultural history, all kinds of things. You're going to be sort of doing some things in each of these categories, but I'd encourage you to think as you set out on your trip, like, which of these am I most interested in? And you can sort of color your trip to emphasize those things. And as you tour the country, you can sort of emphasize those as you go. So first off, let's talk about a few different types of things you're going to see when you're out on the road. Finally get to some photographs here. Geysers are a really easy one when you're touring the country. And these are one of the things that are all of the sort of major geyser spots are really easily accessible from Reykjavik. And so if you're really interested in this type of geology, the way in which the sort of, you know, water gets superheated and you get this steam that explodes up out of the ground on a specific schedule, this is from a place called Geyser, which gave its name to all of the geysers in the world. And this is an easy trip out from Reykjavik and a great place to go and explore and sort of witness this on a very consistent schedule. So on the left, you can see this geyser exploding. On the right, you can see it just about to sort of explode right as it's bubbling up, and you get this really cool visual as it's coming to the surface. You also see all kinds of other sort of geologic formations that sort of remind you of geysers or of mini volcanoes as you tour the countryside. This gets into the area where I remind you about the disclaimer, but mostly I just thought this was a really cool photograph of the Earth sort of steaming out of this pile of rocks with a cool rainbow in the background. Maybe the thing that Iceland is most well known for are the sort of preponderance of waterfalls, waterfalls that are very, very large. You can see if you look very closely here, there's a couple people standing on this waterfall. So very, very large waterfalls, and waterfalls that are just sort of almost look like they're computer rendered because they are just so unimaginably beautiful and tucked into the landscape. But one of the things that is sort of, I think, the coolest about the way in which you can experience the waterfalls is that there are some big ones. I think this is Selfoss. There are big ones that you'll find, you'll know the name of, they'll be recommended in your guidebooks. But as you drive around, you're just going to see them as far as the eye can see, sort of across the landscape. And you can sort of poke and wander and explore each of these. You don't need to go to just the big ones with the observation decks. Many of them you can go up and hike behind and explore. We'll talk about this hike a little bit more in a minute, and how you can sort of follow this river all the way back up, and all of the waterfalls that are behind this waterfall. You're also going to see volcanoes, new and old, sort of. Iceland is just one big volcano, or I guess a series of big volcanoes. And so I would really recommend studying the sections of your guidebook that are going to talk to you a little bit about the geology of Iceland, because you're going to come to understand what you're seeing when you see, these very strange rock formations that are, these very specific crystalline shapes. Or when you look out over a landscape at the side of the road and you think, why is that road so, or why is the land so like fuzzy and bubbly? You're going to sort of read your guidebook and realize, oh, this is a specific type of lava from a volcanic eruption that is sort of formed in this way and then gotten covered in this specific type of moss that's growing on top of it. And if you go in to do any hikes into the center of the country, you will see the sort of actual remnants of volcanoes that have erupted, in the ancient past or in the more recent past, or other types of sort of geologic activity from different vents and things from all of the volcanic activity. This is from a hike near Eyjafjallajökull, whatever it is, the Iceland, the volcano that blew up a few years ago and screwed up air travel. But it's something you can go hike and check out. I mentioned sort of the cultural opportunities in Iceland. And again, this is where a guidebook just comes in so much handy, because a lot of these sites are really undermarked. They'd be very easy to miss. And what you'll find are sort of preserved farms, small villages, other types of sort of history and science museums and centers that you can go in and usually just sort of explore freely, maybe with an interpretive center. But, going and understanding how people manage to not only sort of survive, but also put together a society that functioned across this island prior to sort of any modern conveniences is really powerful experience. And I think it does help you also understand the landscape that you're seeing. So I'd sort of grouped the landscape under this category, because I think once you start to understand the Norse history, the sort of 10th century early settlement of Iceland on up through the modern day, and understand how they related to the landscape and these sort of very dramatic sights that they were seeing all around them every day, it does, I think, help you understand and have more of a respect for all of the people that have been on this island for 1,000 years before you. And this is a I don't remember the name of this site, but you could probably imagine it's something like, Devil's Fingers or something, right? These sites that just sort of convey the sense of foreboding and the sense of drama it must have been to live on this sort of outpost in the middle of nowhere in that time. There's also some really fun opportunities for adventure as you tour the country, and that adventure can take whatever form adventure means for you. So if you're someone who's really into horseback riding and you want to go on a sort of horse tour of the country, that's an option. If you are a sort of really serious alpinist and you want to go into the center of the country and do alpine hiking, hire a guide, don't go by yourself. You can do that. But there's also some options that are sort of very adventurous without you needing any special skills in advance. All you need is money. And so, for example, you can, very near Reykjavik, go on a day trip that will take you inside a no longer sort of exploding volcano. And so this is a place where you go and they pick you up on a bus in Reykjavik. Take you a couple hours outside the city, you do some hiking, you get to a place where literally they've taken a window washing elevator from like a German window washing elevator, like you would put on the side of a building, and you get into it, and then they lower you down into a volcano that they've got lights in, and you're now in the heart of a volcano, and you see all of these amazing colors from the rocks that have had minerals deposited on them and have been heated at all these extreme temperatures. And you just sort of hang out there. So again, this is the kind of thing where if you're spending any time in Reykjavik, or even when you're just at the camper rental place, you should always do this anytime you travel, but you go through all of the brochures on the little brochure rack, and you pick out the things that look cool and you take them with you. And then, as you go on your trip, you just flip through them and see, hey, it does sound pretty fun to go into the center of a volcano. Let's do that. You don't have to sort of decide these things in advance, but there's tons of opportunities like this. If you're into scuba, there's some, sort of really unique scuba opportunities. If you're really into birds, you can get on a boat and go off the coast of Iceland on even smaller islands, and there's birds you can see, all kinds of things. I would say for me, sort of hiking certainly is the thing that is the main draw for me, sort of long distance hiking that gets you away from even the most minimal of tourist crowds into a place where you can be on a landscape like this, and the only person is the one who's taking your photograph and you. So this is on a specific hike that, if you're up for it, I would classify as one of the best hikes I've ever gotten to experience, which is from Skogar to Thorsmork. And you'll notice that this is a photograph from All Trails, because of course you should use All Trails to do all of your hiking planning. But I specifically wanted to call this one out to talk about a really cool service that exists across Iceland on any of the semi-popular hiking trails, which is on a trail like this. You'll notice we're starting in Skogar and ending at Thorsmark, and it's a 16-mile trail. You would not want to do that as an out and back. You would not want to walk 16 miles and then come back 16 miles. It's a hard hike. But luckily, they have these off-road buses that are just sort of running on a schedule. And so you get to the stop at the end of the route, and then you hop on one of these buses, and they run on sort of very generous schedules, because especially during the high season, the sun never sets, so people are hiking all the time. And for a few euros, you finish your hike, you get on the bus, and it takes you back to where you started. And that really opens up opportunities for getting sort of much further into the countryside than if you were having to plan time for doubling back. So lots of opportunities for doing hikes. Again, pop on All Trails or pop up in your guidebook and take a look at just the hiking opportunities around wherever you happen to be at a given time. And you certainly will not be disappointed. I think we have hot springs, and these come in a couple different forms. These are sort of hot springs or thermal baths or spas. We've got fancy ones, we've got not so fancy ones, and we've got the open quote or quote unquote hidden ones. On the right, you see a pretty fancy one. This is the one at Mývatn, which is up in the north of the country. You've probably heard of the Blue Lagoon, which is near Reykjavik. So those are, if you're really into that sort of spa experience and you want something that's going to let you, have food and drinks and go into the sauna and go into the hot springs and all of that, that's definitely a cool experience. But you should also know that in just about every town in the country in which the geology permits, there'll be some sort of local hot spring, usually in the equivalent of a YMCA. So you go and you pay, maybe €3, €5. You change into your swimming suit, and it's just a family swimming pool hangout that happens to have different hot springs, different, thermally heated baths, pools that you can get into and bake and, go into the sauna. And it's a much more sort of local experience, just hanging out. And I think those are really fun. And then there's every travel blog that talks about Iceland telling you about hidden hot springs out in nature. And the idea is these are the ones where you're going to literally go hiking and you come to a pool in the ground, which is full of hot water, and you're going to get in it. None of these are hidden, because if you're reading about them on the internet, they're not hidden. And the hidden ones, the Icelandic folks aren't telling you about. But if I mean, it could be a really cool experience, definitely worth checking out. Do only go to the ones, if you're going to go if you're going to go out into the nature, do the hot spring thing. I would say follow some blog's recommendation. If you do, and you're probably not going to, if you do happen to stumble upon some really hot water when you're out on a hike and you haven't read about it in advance, don't get in it, because that might not be the type of water that doesn't kill you. So just be aware of that. So how does this all work? I said I'd talk a little bit about the sort of campground experience and how this all works. This is a photo from the top of the Skogar waterfall, looking back at our campground. So there's our camper van right there. You'll notice it's, sort of nothing fancy. It's just a place where a bunch of vans park. You can see a bunch of tents pitched over here with a windbreak. And then this building here has showers and bathrooms and a sort of hangout lounge with a bulletin board where people post information about the tour bus schedules and, people who are looking for hiking partners and all of that. And then in the landscape behind, you can actually see that is the ocean out there. So it is not too far from the ocean. But again, camping at a place like this is going to cost a couple euros. It's going to give you somewhere to park. You can leave for the day to go hiking because, of course, you're near all these amazing hiking trails. And this was, I think, the campground in particular that absolutely sold me on camper van being the right option, because after we'd gotten back from our hike, which was a pretty intense hike, we were sitting in our van with the heat on, having some hot chocolate, looking out our window, watching people try and pitch tents in what was by then maybe a 40-mile-an-hour wind. And that looked like a very unpleasant experience. And so I was feeling pretty smug about our choice to do the camper van experience at that point. And you're going to have an opportunity when you go and rent your camper van to add in all kinds of other accessories. So you can add sort of lawn chairs and an outdoor table, and if you need a French press or you need other types of specialty cooking apparel, those are going to be $1 rental or $3 rental, that kind of thing. And so you can set up, this is a different campground. It's a little more private, where we had a dedicated space, and we could set up and cook and just enjoy a beautiful evening, until we realized that we were staying in Mývatn, which is Icelandic for, I believe, like stinging gnats. And we were actually swarmed with bugs, but separate story. So you can do that. You can have, these really nice, just traditional camping experiences. And then as you're driving around, you're going to be going through all kinds of really cute little towns and fishing villages. And so you can pull over for a coffee and a cake. But the nice thing is you're not having to figure out how to source every meal in town, or, constantly worrying about that kind of thing, because you're traveling with your kitchen and all of your food. And so if you just get hungry while you are out driving, you can pull over into a safe pull off. Make sure you're not, blocking the highway, but you can pull off and make a pot of ramen and enjoy a pretty nice view behind you. And if the weather kicks up too much, you just close the door a little bit more, because the weather will pick up. I think I will just reiterate that even we were there literally at the summer solstice, which is the most summery part of summer, and the weather was still at times fairly intense, such that you could easily sort of rest a lot of your weight against the wind. And so it is it is a place of rapidly shifting weather. So just a couple things not to do, just as reminders. Don't do the wild camping thing. Don't try and be a hero in your camper van, and don't overplan. And I think if you can sort of stick to those things, you're gonna have a really safe trip, and you're gonna have a really fun trip that feels like you went on an adventure instead of feeling like you followed a set itinerary. And you're gonna be then coming back and telling all of your friends, oh, you went to Iceland, did you do this? Oh no, you got to do this. I think that's really one of the fun things about it. It's not like going to, Florence, where, there's a fairly limited universe of things that you're going to be talking about having done. I love Florence, but it's less about adventure, right? Iceland, you're going to be going and doing things that no one else who's been to Iceland has ever done. So a few logistics. First off, as I say, you're going to be in Reykjavik. We didn't talk specifically about Reykjavik here, but Reykjavik is super cool in that sort of Northern European Nordic way. You can have amazing food that is, meticulously stacked on top of tiny little toasts. And the sites near Reykjavik are fantastic. So don't fall into the trap of thinking like, well, these are all for tourists. These are all for tourists. I want to do the really serious stuff. It's like, no, like some of the most amazing hot springs, geysers, waterfalls, and sort of general geologic sites are within an easy drive of Reykjavik. One thing I didn't mention specifically in this slideshow, but if you're more interested in sort of the modern built environment and the green energy that is sort of, Iceland is a hotbed of green energy, primarily geothermal, but also hydropower and other things. There's some really cool opportunities near Reykjavik to like go tour a geothermal plant and get a better sense of how they're sort of trying to remake their economy now around being a zero carbon source of energy for things like aluminum production and data centers and all kinds of other things. So definitely an option near Reykjavik as well. Do the weird stuff, pick up those brochures and just keep building them up in your van as you tour around and, think about, well, like maybe we should do this, mountain biking down a, volcanic, I don't know, whatever. There's all kinds of weird stuff. And stop when you want to stop. Don't feel like you need to get to a destination just because you kind of got it in your head that you needed to get to this particular town by the third day of your trip. If you're having a great time and, you get to the end of your, 5 days, 7 days in Iceland, and you've only made it halfway around the country, the great thing is it's not that big. You could just drive back to Reykjavik. It's only going to take, half a day of driving or something. You don't have to feel like a completionist and you don't have to stick to a schedule. Every day, watch the weather, use a good weather app or look on some of the Icelandic specific websites just to be aware if the weather's going to tip from sort of questionable into dangerous, especially if you're planning a longer hike where you're going to be out of contact. Do keep an eye on the weather. There's almost no need for cash anywhere in Iceland. And so, almost all of your payments are going to be totally cashless, just with a tap credit card. Do take advantage of bathroom stops as you pass through towns and be smart about your fuel, basic like traveling logistics. You're never so far off the grid that, you need to be planning a whole day in advance for any of these things. But, you do want to keep an eye on your map and make sure that if you're going to be going for a few hours between towns, you got enough gas. So that is my last slide about Iceland. I would love it if you have any questions, throw them in the question and answer widget. I'll click over there in a minute. Normally I would flip to a slide about what's coming next, but I think we're going to put a pause on webinars for a bit because we're going to be in Malaysia for next month's scheduled time, and we're going to be in Italy. We're going to be in Italy for the one after that. And so maybe we'll pick these up again if I have some new things to share, some new places to try and convince you to go later this spring. If you have ideas for things you'd like to hear me talk about, whether it's a specific destination or if there are travel nerd things that you want a rambling 40-something to talk to you about, I guess you know how to reach me because I think I know all of you. So questions that you might have. I think one question that comes up quite a bit is, we talked about this ring, the ring road, route one around the country. Obviously, that's sort of an oval. There's stuff inside the oval, and you might be wondering what is in there. And the answer is like a lot of glaciers and mountains, some high sort of prairie, but basically to get too far into the middle of the country with a very few number of exceptions, to get too far into the country, you're minimally going to need a four-wheel drive vehicle. But honestly, I do think unless you've done that kind of off-road driving and off-grid sort of adventuring before, you're going to want to do that as part of a guided tour. And that can be just literally hiring a guide who has a vehicle and is going to take you into the country, into the middle of the country, not necessarily going in a big group. But that does to me feel like maybe tipping into the irresponsible, even though of course you can go and you can rent a 4x4 at the airport. There's nothing legally preventing you from doing it. But that does, unless you're experienced in that way, you're not going to have cell service. You're not going to see other people driving by. You're not going to have access to, any sort of evacuation plan. And so I do think using a guide for that. Another thing that is accessible just in terms of other activities, someone was asking about, is different types of guided hiking excursions that take you up onto different glaciers or into sort of different geologic formations that are harder to get to on your own. Certainly if you're of the sort of financial means, you can do the sort of thing that you like literally get helicoptered onto a glacier and do this sort of hiking there. You don't necessarily need to be quite at that level. And again, those are super cool opportunities and very much things you're going to take a guide for. You don't mess around with big blocks of ice that you are not intimately familiar with, I would say. Other questions, local crafts, culture. So Kat was asking, anything like cork in Portugal. And I'm trying to think, Kat, and you can also help me out here. The thing I remember most are the sort of Icelandic sweaters and other types of clothing that are fairly unique to the country because of the unique weather of the country, and the fact that Iceland has a fairly thriving industry in raising lamb and horses primarily. I suppose would be the other sort of animals that are raised in the country. You're not going to see a lot of other things, but there are an awful lot of lambs running around in Iceland, and they give their wool to make beautiful sweaters and other types of garments as well. And hasn't even Icelander written a book, Kat says. I don't know what that means. Hasn't every Icelander maybe written a book? What are the cool things that you didn't get to that you're excited to do when you go back? Honestly, I think I would like to look at some opportunities for doing some multi-day hikes. And again, that can be done in a very sort of accessible, affordable way by just renting a sort of package set of overnight gear at the airport or at your RV rental or your camper van rental place. Because the one hike, the one big hike we did, which was that one from Skogard to Thorsmark, was an all-day sort of thing. But I think it would have been really cool to actually continue on for maybe another day of hiking, and there are then more bus opportunities to get back, because you do really get the sense that, like, by the time you're sort of 4 hours into a hike, you're not seeing anyone at all anymore, and you really get the sense that not a lot of people are going that way. And by hour 8, you're very much just feeling like you're on your own. There are, I would mention, for people who get nervous about things, there are rescue huts sort of along all the hikes. So if the weather really changes, you're not going to get killed. It just might be unpleasant. And then a question here about sort of other types of culture as well. If you are interested in sort of more connections with the culture, there's lots of literature out there. Every Icelandic person seems to have a knack for poetry or other types of sort of beautiful writing. And I'm always a fan of sort of doing that type of reading before a trip or on a trip. So certainly that's the good thing to engage with. We also didn't do any of the sort of water-based excursions off to some of those outlying islands, but again, there's some really unique history, both geologically and in terms of the natural history of some of the islands off the coast of Iceland. And if you can plan it right with the weather, that can be a really cool opportunity, I think, a really cool excursion. So yeah, and honestly, we only spent maybe 2 days in Reykjavik, and I would definitely spend more time in Reykjavik too. It definitely seemed like a really cool city with a lot to offer that we didn't really get to engage with as well. So yeah, that is what I would have to share with you about sort of doing a camper van experience of Iceland. Again, I hope your takeaways will be it can be a really cheap trip, and it certainly doesn't have to be an expensive trip. It's very accessible, especially if you're in Minnesota, where you've got really cheap flight options to Iceland. And it can be just a really fun adventure that lets you sort of play things by ear and go where your heart takes you or where your eyes take you as you're out driving around. So definitely think about it as an option. And I hope you all have a great rest of your month. Thanks.